Have you ever been playing a match of Halo multiplayer, stop and look around and think, where am I? What's this place's story? Well, what if I told you that Halo's multiplayer is more than just a fun and addictive player versus player experience? To a certain extent, it's actually canon.
Each location and game mode you play are simulations where real Spartans compete in tactical exercises that are digitally generated in a few real locations within the Halo universe, such as the UNSC Infinity or space stations like Anvil Station. Each location is a simulation of a real place in universe that was scanned, copied, and uploaded to UNSC databases to be used during the previously mentioned Spartan training exercises.
So now that you know that, let's talk about some of these locations and the interesting implications within these classic Halo 3 play spaces, because believe it or not, they each tell a very interesting story. Let's start with Construct.
Vast quantities of water and other raw materials are consumed, creating even the smallest orbital installations. First of all, what's the exact definition of construct? What does that word mean? There are two relevant definitions for the word: build or erect. Something, typically a building, road, or machine, or a physical thing which is deliberately built or formed. So construct, unsurprisingly, is most likely used to, construct things, or it's simply a reference to the fact that this entire facility is in of itself a construct. One of the most obvious things about this location is that it's somewhere on the Ark. If you look to the horizon, you can see this very clearly. The Ark is a megastructure that the Forerunners built to manufacture Halo rings. A good portion of Halo 3's campaign takes place there. The area is patrolled by two different variations of Sentinel, constructors, which are designed to repair and maintain Forerunner structures. They don't have any weapon systems of their own, which is why the second variation of Sentinel is also present, the Aggressor. Their purpose is similar to the Constructor. They perform maintenance as well, but unlike the Constructor, they're outfitted with hard light weaponry. Their purpose here is to not only assist the Constructors, but also to protect them. This facility bears a striking resemblance to a location within the Halo 3 campaign mission, the Ark. Both of their purposes, as the name of the map implies, are to aid in construction. The giant waterfall surrounding the area is most likely used to harvest the water for materials to help create Halo rings, or perhaps maintain other parts of the Ark. Where exactly the water is being funneled and what processes are undergone to make use of the resource are unknown. The entire installation is covered in walkways that are clearly designed for foot traffic. Most of these walkways are made of translucent materials, which seem to indicate they were designed with observation in mind. Which makes sense. I mean, just look at this place. It's beautiful. Say what you want about the Forerunners' arrogance or selfishness, but you can't deny that they had a sense of style. They always made their structures aesthetically pleasing. Each walkway and wall is covered in ornate and functionally unnecessary designs. It's amazing how a facility like this, built solely to create and harvest materials, is still given the utmost architectural care. Forerunners very clearly valued presentation and art regardless of their created structure's intended purpose. There are two lifts on either side of the play space that are most likely designed to ferry supplies to the upper levels, perhaps even the fusion coils piled up next to them. Fusion coils are generally used as a means of storing volatile substances somewhat safely. One of the walls on the upper level of the facility is a Forerunner fusion coil storage area. Perhaps this is where some of the refined materials are stored before being transported across the Ark to help power its innumerable systems. Underneath the structure is a strange strip of metal adorned with glowing light. It connects to both gravity lifts, so perhaps it's some kind of wiring or power source. Glowing yellow lights on the first floor of the structure are visible through an incredibly sturdy Forerunner glass. Much like the fusion coil storage area, this could be where some of the materials harvested by the installation are stored. These are the same color as the previously mentioned device located on the underside of the location. Perhaps this power source is partly siphoned and used to help power a construct. There's also a large golden lift towards the back of the map that appears to be linked to the same strange power source that I mentioned earlier. One of the windows in particular is inlaid with a series of strange symbols. These unique symbols are very, very uncommon throughout the Halo universe, but more on them later. Next up is Epitaph. Some believe the Forerunners preferred desolate places. Others suggest that few other sites survived the flood. Much like construct, let's look at the definition of the word epitaph. A phrase or form of words written in memory of a person who has died, especially as an inscription on a tombstone. One of the first things anyone playing a game on Epitaph will likely notice is the strange hologram that appears to be watching over the installation. What is that thing? Well, that is offensive bias. Offensive Bias is one of the two greatest Forerunner AIs ever created. He was designed to defeat Mendicant Bias, another Forerunner AI of immeasurable power that betrayed the Forerunners and helped the Flood almost destroy the entire galaxy. Mendicant Bias was corrupted by the Flood and ended up doing their bidding. This was the first ever example of the Logic Plague, which is basically the Flood's way of infecting an inorganic mind. Fortunately, Offensive successfully fulfilled his purpose by defeating Mendicant, one of the most crucial steps in the Forerunners' last-ditch effort against the Flood. Following Mendicant's defeat, Offensive would be tasked to watch over Mendicant's burial site ever since, meaning this entire construct is the burial site of Mendicant, and to this day, Offensive continues to guard the tomb of his twin. This monument to Mendicant's sins contains a number of strange holographic geometric patterns that seemingly serve no purpose and contain no interface for interaction. Standing within these causes them to glitch out and distort. The windows of the entire structure are covered with the same symbols on the windows of Construct. Something about the glyphs here and the way they're presented makes me think of the text you'd see at a museum exhibit. A scrolling wall of text detailing a particular item. Epitaph is very quiet and remote, obviously to keep Mendicant isolated, but also perhaps, much like visiting a cemetery that contains the grave of a loved one, the Forerunners would come here to think, to contemplate their failures, or perhaps mourn the many deaths brought from the Forerunner Flood War. Maybe even to pay respects to Mendicant, one of the greatest Forerunner AIs ever created. Despite any indication in the sky, Epitaph, much like Construct, is also located on the Ark, quite possibly within the same seemingly infinite desert. An immense storm surrounds the area as well, most likely acting as another layer of security to keep this place hidden and isolated. Splatters of purple blood on one of the outer walkways suggest there was a struggle not so long ago. Quad wings float above and around the facility, high above the sands below. These predatory birds are one of the first examples of Forerunner gene crafting. That means that these creatures were essentially created by the Forerunners, or at the very least, massively altered. Think Jurassic Park. Their presence is a clear indication that the Forerunners have either manufactured or repaired the local ecosystems. There are several different subspecies of quadwing that have each evolved slightly differently based on environmental factors. Why are they here? Surely there's no food source in this vast wasteland. Animals need water and food to survive, neither of which are very abundant in harsh desert environments like this. The behavior of these creatures is very reminiscent of a real-life animal, vultures. Much like the creatures that soar above this great epitaph, vultures will often fly high in the air, circling and floating atop massive waves of heat, or thermals. Riding these thermals allows the vultures to gain altitude with little to no effort. Hot air rises, and they use this to their advantage. Why do they do this? For fun, perhaps, or to gain an incredible vantage point to better see or smell food. Yes, I did say smell. Turkey vultures specifically have the largest olfactory gland in the world, meaning they can smell dead things from miles and miles away. Perhaps these creatures are no different. A melancholic humming can be heard from far in the distance, almost as if the sands themselves are mourning the loss of a friend. What is this sound? No one can say for sure. Perhaps it's the sound of the Flood growing ever closer to this isolated monument. The moaning of Mendicant Bias left to regret his actions for all eternity, or the groans of ancient Forerunner machinery attempting to fulfill a purpose long forgotten. Sorry to interrupt, but do me a quick favor and press that subscribe button real quick. Oh, and hit the thumbs up too when you're down there. Done? Okay, thanks. Citadel. In the heart of this Forerunner structure, far above the troubled surface of the Ark, another battle rages. Let's once again look at the definition of the word citadel, a fortress, typically on high ground, protecting or dominating a city. Much like Epitaph and Construct, Citadel appears to take place in roughly the same area. It also contains some of the very same glyphs from those locations as well. Outside of the structure, viewable through the windows, is a very familiar desert, the very same desert that contains Epitaph. This means Citadel exists somewhere far below Epitaph, most likely within the same Forerunner structure. Using these context clues, we're able to determine that Epitaph takes place on the Ark. The roof of the structure has several windows as well, but bizarrely, it's impossible to see Epitaph through them. Perhaps simply because there just isn't a proper angle to see it? It's odd to say the least, but regardless, Citadel is most definitely within the same desert as Epitaph, if not the same complex of buildings. A strange pit in the center of the facility stretches far down below. Its purpose is lost to time. Ominously, the ancient Forerunner structure seems to moan and groan as if the building itself is alive, and with its old age comes aches and pains. Considering Epitaph is the burial site for Mendicant Bias, this means that when we're playing in Citadel, we're substantially closer to Mendicant, and by extension, offensive as well. Perhaps they exist somewhere within or just below this very room. Sandtrap. Although the brute occupiers had been driven away from this ancient structure, they left plenty to remember them by. It's located somewhere on the Ark, perhaps deep within the desert in the Halo 3 campaign mission with the same name. The outer ring and the towers built periodically on top of it are made of a fairly typical Forerunner alloy. Atop each tower is a golden light that appears to remain ever vigilant, keeping watch of the structures below. The sands beyond the central structures are populated with a seemingly infinite supply of landmines that spring out from the ground and destroy anyone foolish enough to get caught within their blast radius. Each mine is covered with long blades that are ejected from the device upon detonation. If you're somehow able to survive the initial explosion, the shrapnel-like blades will pierce your flesh and create severe lacerations throughout your body. Based on the design of these mines, I would guess they were created and placed here by the brute occupiers the map description speaks of. They bear a striking resemblance to spike grenades, and in general match the brute's design philosophies. Basically, scary looking and covered with giant spikes. If you were to remove the handle from a spike grenade, it would look almost identical to these. The towers are clearly designed to watch over the area, though whatever it is they're watching and waiting for is unclear. The older stone buildings within this vast desert are of a very strange composition. They're not made of the typical Forerunner alloy that was built to last forever. Instead, they're constructed out of an ancient stone that has withered and decayed slightly over time. Were these structures built by ancient Forerunners before their ascent into near godlike status? Or perhaps they were built by someone else entirely? One thing is for certain, these structures weren't built here at the same time as the Ark itself. They were moved here later. There's evidence that the Forerunners did this type of thing all throughout the Halo universe. The structures in Halo 2 are a great example of this, and more recently, Halo Infinite. The Halo rings aren't just weapons, they're also like museums of sorts. The Forerunners stuffed all kinds of interesting things on the rings to preserve them, living creatures and structures alike. Hanging in the sky is the UNSC Aegis Fate, a Charon-class light frigate whose operational status is mostly unknown. It participated in one of the battles of the Fall of Reach, but their status before then and after stumbling upon this curious stone edifice is unknown. A brief scuffle clearly took place here based on the fact that there's a destroyed Phantom on one side of the map and a crashed UNSC Albatross on the other. Clearly, the UNSC won this battle, however, as they eventually deployed 2 elephants on either side of the site. This location appears to have been buried under tons of sand at one point. Whether the Forerunners did this intentionally or if it was simply a side effect of the weather systems present on the Ark is unknown. The Covenant loved uncovering things that the Forerunners meant to keep hidden, so it wouldn't surprise me if the brute occupiers the description mentions had started excavating the site, which is why it's only partly unburied. The buildings are arranged almost perfectly symmetrical. As you can see, one side has simply been uncovered while the other remains underneath the dunes. The outside edges of the site are lined with small lights which indicate where the mines are located. They appear to be UNSC by design and were most likely placed there to denote where not to walk so that people exploring the location wouldn't be turned to mincemeat. One of the structures has an interior, the door of which is once again adorned with some very odd glyphs. The inside of this structure contains a strange golden beam, also covered in those peculiar symbols that I previously mentioned. In the same chamber is a very odd holographic marking. The walls themselves are etched with an odd pattern that only appears in 2 locations throughout the entire known Halo universe. Displays located inside of the elephants cycle between 2 sets of images, the first of which details the features of the elephant, such as its mounted machine gun, detachable side turrets, ultra-high density armor plating, and its current cargo, a mongoose. The other image is a bit more interesting. It displays a top-down illustration of the map, as well as a side view. It also details the composition of the area's atmosphere, the elements that the surface is composed of, and most intriguingly, a scan of the area's life signs, which is apparently minimal, meaning there is some life here, despite how it may seem. What this life is, I can't say for sure. Perhaps a small population of animals, or maybe something far more sinister. Maybe something buried deep beneath the sand. Sandbox. This endless wasteland still holds many secrets. Some of them are held more deeply than others. Sandbox is one of the most enigmatic locations in the entirety of the Halo franchise. The construct bears a striking resemblance to Sandtrap. It's located in a giant desert, it's surrounded by strange Forerunner walls, it's guarded by ominous towers, and contains the very same style of ancient stone architecture as Sandtrap. One of the biggest differences between Sandtrap and Sandbox is that the towers in Sandbox are much more aggressive. These are weapons that are very much so still active and will easily destroy anyone or anything that stumbles into their line of sight. If you're foolish enough to travel out into the desert, the towers will fire hard light projectiles with the intent to kill. Their destructive capabilities are far greater than their Sandtrap counterparts. The towers in Sandtrap are much more relaxed. They don't fire at targets that are in the air. In fact, they don't fire at anything at all. Instead, they simply watch and wait. Much like Sandtrap, the towers are outfitted with a large yellow-colored spotlight that keeps the central structure illuminated at all times. The outer edges of the play space are lined with small metal markers, each with a pulsing light. These were most likely placed by the UNSC, given their design. They mark the zone in which the towers will begin firing. Cross the line, move past them, and be killed. A large ringed planet hangs in the sky, and a bright orange sun sets in the distance. Many of the structures in this location are covered in the very same runes that were present in Sandtrap and several other select locations. In the center of the play space, covered by a large stone cube, is a shaft that leads down into a large room. The walls are adorned with floodlights, likely placed here when the UNSC was cataloging this location for use in wargame simulations. The same strange symbol that appears in the inner chamber of Sandtrap is etched into the walls, and those odd unknown runes that I've mentioned several times before are carved into the golden strips throughout the entire chamber. The purpose of this room is entirely unknown. Is it a simple storage room, or perhaps something much more sinister? Perhaps this is a prison, and the towers on the outer edges are the wardens, standing ever watchful in the case of someone or some things escape. The top of the hole is also covered by a piece of stone. On the underside of this stone is a strange holographic pattern, once again also seen in Sandtrap. The similarities between the two locations are striking to say the least. So, if Epitaph is a grave for mendicant bias, then what purpose could these two structures possibly serve? The weird thing is, Mendicant's burial site may be guarded by offensive, but other than that, it has no defenses whatsoever, implying that whatever is contained within Sandbox, and to a lesser degree Sandtrap, could potentially be even more dangerous than the AI responsible for the fall of the Forerunners.
Okay, let's take a step back for a second and talk about these weird glyphs that I keep mentioning. These strange patterns are one of the longest running mysteries in the Halo universe. They're not the typical Forerunner alphabet, and they're only used very sparingly throughout the entire franchise. The Halo community has tried to translate these on many different occasions without really any real success. No one knows exactly what they mean. So let's just quickly go over the locations that we've actually seen them so far.
The translucent blue windows of Epitaph, the windows of Construct, a holographic screen in Citadel, the buildings within Sandtrap, and finally some of the structures in Sandbox. Epitaph, Construct, Citadel, and Sandtrap are all confirmed to be on the Ark, all of which are part of or close to an endless desert. So it's safe to assume that Sandbox is located on the Ark as well, as it shares many similarities to the above-mentioned locations. It has the glyphs, it's in a giant desert, it contains strange stone Forerunner structures, and much like Sandtrap, imposing guard towers. These symbols also appear in the end of Halo 2, as seen here. This makes perfect sense, as this is the exact moment we first learn of the Ark's existence, meaning these symbols are once again tied directly to it. These symbols have also cropped up in a much more recent piece of Halo canon, Halo Infinite. This is the only place that these runes appear that isn't on the Ark, or at least referencing it. In Halo Infinite, these runes are on the outside of a prison for the Endless. The Endless are a mysterious race that are somehow immune to the Halo Ring's effect. Because of this, the Forerunners believed they were potentially more dangerous than the Flood. Their origin is unknown. Perhaps they're somehow related to the Precursors, an ancient cosmic godlike race that created both humans and Forerunners, and eventually, unwittingly, became the Flood. Maybe Sandtrap and Sandbox, much like some of the locations on the Halo Ring and Halo Infinite, Zeta Halo, are endless prisons. Maybe that's what those strange towers are watching and waiting for. Guardian. Millennia of tending has produced trees as ancient as the Forerunner structures they have grown around. One of the most noticeable things about Guardian is its name. This is the same name used to describe the giant machines that Cortana attempted to use to police the galaxy. The name of this map could also be a reference to the Forerunners themselves, who acted as guardians to the galaxy.
Welcome to the frickin' Guardians of the Galaxy.
Or guardians to this very location and the trees that surround it. The entire building is surrounded by ancient trees of an unknown type or age and is set within an ancient Forerunner complex on Installation 00, or the Ark. The structure appears to be built into and around the trees, but the description of the map says otherwise, claiming that the trees simply grew around the Forerunner architecture. If you listen closely, it sounds almost like there are drones way out in the distance. We may know that Guardian is somewhere on the Ark, but needless to say, the Ark is an absolutely massive structure, and thanks to the dense foliage and ethereal fog, it's impossible to pin down the exact location of this enigmatic structure. Once again, quad wings patrol the skies just above the facility. The structure doesn't appear to serve any purpose. Maybe it's simply an observation deck for contemplation. A strange holographic sphere rotates inside one of the structure's rooms. It appears to be a visual representation of a planet, but which planet? It's impossible to say for certain. This place is gorgeous, and because of that, I would guess this is a sort of wildlife preserve or botanical garden, where Forerunners go to convene with nature. The description of the map supports the idea that this area was used to nurture plant life, providing further evidence that the location had no practical purpose. The pathways don't seem to lead anywhere in particular, and there doesn't appear to be any machinery anywhere. All of that seems to indicate that this place was most likely used for leisure or wildlife preservation. The same holographic shapes from Epitaph are also on this installation. High Ground. A relic of older conflicts, this base was reactivated after the New Mombasa Slipspace event. The Slipspace event that the description refers to is the moment in Halo 2 where Regret initiates a slipspace jump inside the city, destroying the space elevator and wreaking general havoc on the surrounding area. This location has obvious strategic advantages given its name and location. It's built into a natural rock wall, protecting it from a rear assault, and to a lesser degree an aerial assault as well. The lake on the other side also helps prevent any infantry from conducting a frontal assault. Its actual name is Outpost C9, and it's located in Africa, somewhere in or close to New Mombasa. The structure itself is far older than the Human Covenant War, but its strategic placement makes it an ideal base of operations during the desperate battle for Earth.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
A door and several garages lead further into the cliffside. The large anti-air gun placed in the back of the map furthers the strategic nature of the location, making air assaults basically impossible. 2 of the 3 missiles have already been fired. Many old military bases and forts were repurposed during the Battle for Earth in desperation and thanks to their obvious strategic benefits. Another notable example being Crow's Nest, which is located within the Halo 3 campaign mission with the same name. Several portions of the base have crumbled and fallen apart, most likely destroyed in a past conflict. I noticed that the inner walls of the buildings are all covered in a very uniform grid-like pattern of holes. My first thought was that these could be bullet holes, but given their symmetry, that's obviously not the case. I'm not really sure why they're here. Isolation. Containment protocols are almost impervious to pre-grave mine infestations. What could possibly go wrong? Obviously, this is a flood containment facility located somewhere on the Ark. Looking up into the sky, you're able to see the entirety of the Milky Way galaxy and portions of the Ark as well. Aggressor and Constructor Sentinels regularly patrol the skies in case any of the Flood attempt to escape this strange circular prison. The wall erected around the play space was either placed there in an attempt to slow the spreading of the disease after a containment breach, or before as an experiment. Perhaps this area was created as a petri dish of sorts. Maybe the Forerunners created a small environment and allowed the Flood to roam free within it to study the changes that they would eventually make to their habitat. Given the description of the map, that's most likely not the case, but I wouldn't put it past them. Much of the environment has already been consumed. Most of the grass and stones are covered in a thick layer of brownish yellow flood cells, and the Forerunner structures themselves are covered in an oozing rot. How much longer can these walls contain this infestation? A strange energy arcs and flows up the wall, almost resembling a bug zapper. As time goes on, the Flood continues to spread throughout the environment, slowly but surely converting the entire area into a blight land, which is a biome that has been converted into nothing but flood cells. Underneath the top layers of the map, the infestation is revealed to be far worse. A thick green fog made from flood spores permeates the air, and the walls themselves are covered in flood blisters in disgusting membranous meat sacs that, when ruptured, release several infection forms contained within. A porta has grown into the very walls of the structure. These butthole-like orifices behave like living doors to allow flood forms to pass through them, or perhaps to consume any non-flood related entities that are foolish enough to step through them. Two strange bunkers on either side of the map appear to serve no purpose. Both are entirely empty and outfitted with what appears to be window shutters and doors, maybe as a potential lockdown procedure. But to what end? There's nothing of note in either structure. Last resort. Remote industrial sites like this one are routinely requisitioned and raised as part of Spartan training exercises. This location is one of several very similar power stations scattered throughout the African island, Zanzibar. This particular power station is labeled as Zanzibar Municipal Turbine Number 7, meaning there's at least 6 others of the same configuration. We know of 3, Zanzibar from Halo 2, Last Resort, the location we're discussing now, and Stonetown from Halo 2 Anniversary Multiplayer, which is actually another name used for the real place, Zanzibar City. The term municipal implies this power plant is owned or at least controlled by a local Zanzibaran government. This particular power station was either manufactured and or owned by Wilterman, Carney, Cotton, and Hayward, Inc. This is the first and only mention of this particular company in canon. These power stations are broken up into sections, this one being labeled as K2433. The exact meaning of this designation is unknown. One section of the map is labeled Camp Froman, which is a reference to a Bungie employee who really loved hanging out in this spot.
Oh, you fucking camping bitch! It's a legitimate strategy!
The center of the map contains a large wind turbine that collects energy and presumably stores it within several large battery-like devices in the back of the site's buildings. As the description stated, the overall shape and design of these structures make them ideal for tactical war games training simulations. Its asymmetric design makes it excellent for one flag capture the flag scenarios in which one team defends their flag from within the buildings and the other assaults from the beach. The modern machinery itself is contrasted by much older stone architecture created by an unknown civilization. Zanzibar has been occupied by humans for at least 20,000 years, maybe longer. Africa is considered the cradle of humanity and was where the Forerunners placed mankind after fighting and defeating them in an ancient war. As punishment for attacking the Forerunners devolved the ancient humans, turning their once great spacefaring equals into primal versions of themselves and forcing them to relearn how to create even the most basic technologies. It's possible that this structure and others like it were created then, or perhaps much more recently in humanity's history. A large cargo crate with the word Traxxas on it is placed in the main building. Traxxas is the name of a large human corporation that specializes in mining and manufacturing operations. It's possible that this entire power station is owned by Traxxas Heavy Industries, or perhaps the people that actually own it have a deal with them. It stands to reason that Traxxas would need large quantities of power to fuel their many mining and factory operations. They're known for their manufacturing. One of its major factory complexes is located on the Halo 3 mission, The Storm, so it's possible that this cargo unit is simply a product that Traxxas offers. Traxxas was one of many companies that fell under ONI investigation in an attempt to root out any connections to a terrorist attack on Cedra, in which a zealous Sangheili activated a bomb that released a compound into the air that was deadly to humans. This compound was collected from the broken remains of Alpha Halo, or Installation 04, the same ring that the majority of Halo CE takes place on. Eventually, this compound was reverse engineered and altered to only affect humans instead of the Halo ring's original purpose, to eliminate any sentient life. Fortunately for Cedra's human occupiers, the device was only partly successful. It was activated within a heavily human-populated area and caused many casualties, but the compound only seemed to affect specific unlucky and unfortunate individuals. ONI needed to determine if Traxxas was somehow involved, but their final verdict is unclear. This was actually part 1 of 2. Part 2 will be up soon, or if you're in the future, it's up now. The link will be in the description, or it'll play automatically, hopefully. Okay, thanks for sticking around. I'm gonna go play some Halo now. I'll see you online.